9 o'clock discourse. Swedish activist Greta Thunberg has asked countries to stop dumping their trash in the ocean. The controversial statement has been met with disdain from world leaders, with many fully grown men referring to the 16-year-old climate activist as retarded, cringy, or a Nazi. Meanwhile, in Brazil, Bolsonaro continues to allow large areas of the Amazon rainforest to be burned to clear space for rearing cattle. While some are concerned that this may result in everyone on the planet suffocating to death, others are worried that raising those concerns is an infringement upon Brazilian sovereignty. High-ranking barrister Michael Mansfield QC has stated that the government should introduce laws that ban the consumption of meat. In the wake of this unprecedented proposal, many activists are using the opportunity to push for a move towards a meat-free diet, but many more still ask, can veganism really save the planet? You know, I didn't think I was going to do a video on this subject, because I was under the impression that most progressives already understood that veganism was the best way forward and were either doing it or trying to. Apparently not. Spoiler alert, veganism is not going to save the planet. At least, not by itself, because it's not as straightforward as that. Nothing is ever as straightforward as that. But whether or not we should be doing it shouldn't even be in question, and it worries me that some people still seem to think it is. If you're someone who still thinks that eating meat is totally fine, then this video is probably a bit next level for you. I would suggest that you go watch one of the hundreds of other videos explaining why you should be vegan, and then come back to this. This video is aimed at people who already have a solid understanding of the arguments for veganism in terms of ethics and the environment, but still think that doing it is up for debate. So let's start with the topic that seems to be particularly hot right now. Veganism is racist. The idea being that it's just rich white people pushing their values on non-rich, non-white people, particularly indigenous ones. I, for one, find it really interesting that indigenous people suddenly become relevant when it suits white people not having to do anything. All the more so, given that a lot of the beef that we consume is farmed on land taken from indigenous people. Conflating the entire philosophy of veganism with a bunch of trendy white girls that you see on Instagram is wildly misrepresentative. I mean, hello, I am not the only vegan that looks like this. Furthermore, veganism revolves around non-violence and therefore can't possibly have been pioneered by white people. Not hurting animals isn't a white invention. It's been practiced, for example, across ancient Asian civilizations around and including India for centuries. It remains a central concept to most practitioners of Hinduism, Buddhism, and Jainism today. Acting as if veganism is a white thing is arguably quite racist in itself. You know what's not racist though? Whinging about the Yulin Dog Festival because they eat puppies and we don't, because killing intelligent beings totally capable of happiness, grief, and all-consuming terror would be barbaric. So what about indigenous hunter-gatherers in the actual rainforest? You know, like the one being burned down for cattle farming. Do they get to hunt and gather? Because if they get to hunt and gather, I get to buy 2-for-1 pre-prepared chicken ready meals and cook them in the oven. I mean, fair's fair. Consider, if you will, the fact that we vegans frequently find ourselves stranded on desert islands inhabited purely by pigs. For some reason, whenever this happens, which is often, we're unable to eat whatever the pigs are eating, so we're forced to kill and eat the pigs. When we are eventually rescued, which is soon, because this happens so often that there are thousands of people out combing desert islands in search of lost vegans, we nonetheless are vegan no longer. Our entire ideology crumbles into oblivion. Except it doesn't, because this hypothetical scenario that you have definitely never heard before completely misses the point. The idea is to be vegan because you can, not because you can't? If you're watching this, I'm pretty sure you're not stranded on a desert island. You most likely live in a capitalist hellscape with access to every vitamin supplement and meat substitute you could ever want. In this environment, not contributing to demand for one of our society's most globally harmful products is the least you can do. And this applies regardless of cultural heritage. It's important to people is not an excuse for unnecessary non-consensual violence. We don't accept religion as an excuse for homophobia, and by the same logic, we shouldn't accept tradition as an excuse for carnism. But there are some people within our society for whom veganism also isn't a realistic option. When I was about 12, I read a book by Jeremy Clarkson. This happened because I was staying with my cousin, who was obsessed with cars, so everything he owned was related to Top Gear. And I was bored, so there I was, being 12 and reading Liking Cars and Being an Asshole by Jeremy Clarkson. As far as I can remember it, the book was a random collection of his opinions, written seemingly with the intent of reassuring middle-aged men that it is okay to be a completely insufferable person. One of these opinions was something like, "Look, I can understand why you would be vegetarian if you're really sick, like if you have some sort of horrible health condition that means you're hospitalized on a regular basis and too physically frail to digest the proteins in meat, then fair enough. It's vegetarians that choose to be that way that I just can't stand." And that statement really stuck with me, partially because of how absurd it was to equate eating meat with strength when that's actually the easy option we literally do by default. But also because I thought, that's interesting. The way that he feels about vegetarians is exactly how I feel about people who eat meat. Because this happens. And I'm not talking about individuals who eat nothing but raw carrots for months and then come online to say veganism nearly killed me. I'm talking about die-hard ethical vegans who follow that diet on top of a health condition for years and eventually have to start eating animal products again in order to get by. This has happened to more than one of my friends, and let me tell you, they were not happy about it. I fully believe that they did this because they had to and weren't just using it as some kind of an excuse. Money is another major capacity limiting factor. Granted, the idea that only rich people can be vegan is complete bollocks. Foods such as rice and lentils are very nutritious and in fact provide the base diet for poor populations across the world. But if you're working a brutal 9 to 5 on minimum wage just to keep your head afloat, then you don't necessarily have the spare time or energy to do anything more than grab whatever's easiest, cheapest, and most readily available, which normally means animal products. And if you're living off food stamps, then you don't necessarily have a whole lot of choice when it comes to what you eat. There are hundreds of situations that can make veganism impractical, and especially where health and money problems intersect, even if your health problem isn't directly related to your diet. For example, if you find it physically difficult to prepare food, then buying cheap vegan ingredients isn't as much of an option as buying cheap non-vegan ready meals. I don't know whether or not it is definitely physically possible for every single individual to be vegan if they just have access to the right nutrition. What I do know is that that situation is not possible for many people. When I say people should be vegan, I am not talking about instances where doing so will have a serious negative impact on your physical or mental health. But doesn't the existence of any people unable to eat animals mean that the meat industry must continue to exist? Well, no, because that's just with relation to veganism in the society we have now, which is one of staggering wealth inequality. The goal of progressive vegans isn't to keep everything the same except more plants, it's to change society for the better, with a move towards veganism being just one of those changes. In isolation, veganism doesn't provide all the answers, and it's ridiculous to expect it to. The overarching problems need to be tackled anyway. And as they are, it will allow more people access to a healthy diet that does not involve the slaughter of sentient beings. When done with a view to produce food as ethically and efficiently as possible, a switch to a vegan diet is part of combating these problems as much as it is one of the end goals of doing so. Besides some very genuine instances of veganism being too difficult for people to do, there are a lot of less valid reasons that people have for adopting. Some say that veganism is individualist and just won't change anything on the grand scheme of things. Soy farming can have a very detrimental environmental impact, as can the production of other vegan staples such as almonds. What about the ethical ramifications for foods that have to be imported, such as avocados or quinoa? What about the carbon footprint? What about conditions for the workers? Well, these are valid concerns, and we could sit here all day addressing them. I could say that veganism as a philosophy is one that is centered on the welfare of others who aren't just not your immediate family, but not your immediate species. That's as non-individualist as you can get. As for soy crops, the majority of them are fed to cattle, which are then fed to people, which is an extremely inefficient system. If you remove the middle cow, then soy production remains many times more environmentally friendly than beef. Almonds are probably not our best bet for a milk alternative. Most research is pointing towards oats, which can be grown in Europe and also have a much lower carbon footprint. I should add that all of these alternatives are still overall better for the environment than dairy. As for avocados, quinoa, and other superfoods, they're entirely non-essential to the vegan diet. You don't eat an avocado and become vegan, that's not how it works. Unethical avocado farming is a problem, absolutely, and there's no denying that its popularity among food bloggers has been part of what's led to the increase in production. But what we're seeing here isn't unique or new. The UK's relationship with other countries has always been deeply exploitative and driven by supply and demand. Unethical agriculture is not a problem intrinsic to veganism or caused by veganism, but by capitalism and white supremacy. I could sit here looking at each and every concern in detail. But the truth is, when people ask these questions, they don't really want answers. They want excuses. They're not saying, here's an issue, how do we work around it? They're saying, here's an issue showing that veganism can't solve every problem on the planet, therefore I don't need to bother with it at all. And this is a very persuasive and common line of thinking. After all, believing that your own lifestyle is already the most ethical one, or that changing it just won't make any difference, means that you don't have to do anything. And that's a lot more convenient. This kind of reaction isn't unique to veganism. I see it as a response to any kind of progressive rhetoric that requires action. I would call this willful fatalism. The idea that you can't change the way things are, or that changing it will bring new, unexpected problems. Therefore, the best course of action is to just accept it and do nothing. Do I need to explain why this attitude sucks? I mean, let's just say that this discussion was about something different. Let's say it was about affordable housing for everyone. Or go one step further, let's say it was about the total abolition of landlords. Imagine you're having this discussion with an older relative who dismisses the idea of a world without landlords as idealistic or naive and simply shoots problems at you, ones that you can't even answer because you're not an expert. But you know enough to know that a world without landlords is possible and that our current housing system is fucked, and therefore you want to change it. Even if that means going into uncharted territory, even if it means we're dealing with new, unexpected problems, even if it means sometimes being uncomfortable. The end result is worth it. So maybe, rather than saying some people can't be vegan because of health or wealth problems, so let's not bother, we should be saying, let's tackle wealth inequality so everyone can afford healthy vegan food. Let's create non-exploitative systems of creating that food. Let's take money out of exploitative industries and inject it into lab-grown meat research so that if anyone physically does need animal products in order to survive, they're catered for too. Let's think about how we can mostly follow a diet that has a lower carbon footprint. And most of all, let's think about lobbying our government to regulate big businesses and suppliers who won't do anything unless they are forced to. All of this has to happen in tandem. And yeah, it's a lot. Yeah, it's complicated. And yeah, there will definitely be problems. But more problems than we have now? More problems than a planet about to suffocate and millions of people dying of hunger while Western society contemplates about whether or not to continue killing and eating billions of sentient beings every year? Veganism is a no-brainer. So why is there so much resistance, even among progressives? Do we fail to see a world where animals aren't being harmed like this as better simply because we're not the ones being hurt by it? Do we need to experience suffering in order to experience empathy? If the overall relationship between cishet white men and everybody else is anything to go by, then, well, yeah, maybe. A statement I hear quite often when discussing veganism with such individuals is, I don't care about animals. To which I used to respond with, well, you don't need to care about animals. You just need to care about people. My line of argument being, if we got rid of cattle and instead fed the crops that would have gone to the cattle to all the people, instead, then we'd be doing a lot to eliminate world hunger and save the environment, both of which are in fact beneficial to people. You get the picture. All of that is still true, but I don't tend to say it anymore. Because the trouble with that argument is it assumes the person you're talking to does, in fact, care about people. Every single time those words have been said to me, it has later become apparent that there are, in fact, groups of marginalised people who that individual doesn't care about at all. Privilege provides protection from oppression that fosters a critical lack of empathy towards the oppressed, human or not. In this instance, particularly male privilege, because, as I learned from Jeremy Clarkson, the consumption of meat is actively associated with masculinity, whereas the rejection of it is the very definition of a soy boy. Belonging to an oppressed group, on the other hand, seems to foster empathy towards other oppressed groups. Presumably just because those individuals know what it's like. The vegetarianism and veganism movements have been led by women, with 2/3 of vegans in the UK being female in 2016. And just speaking from personal experience, if I bump into a random disabled queer POC, they're more likely to be vegan, or trying to be, given that they're also more likely to fall into health or wealth category problems, than a random cishet man. But while less common, it is still perfectly possible for the oppressed to use the logic of their oppressors to oppress others. So let's consider that logic. Common justifications for eating meat include animals being stupid, being unimportant, being property, being lesser. But has violence on the basis of superiority ever been valid? I'm not just talking about obviously false claims such as women are less intelligent. I'm talking about justifications that are true. Human babies, for example, are less intelligent than pigs. Does that mean it's okay to eat babies? Because I, for one, am all for it. Don't panic, I'm not saying animals are the same as humans. I don't want pigs in Parliament. They might not be any safer around the Tories than in the slaughterhouse. I'm so sorry. I'm just saying that factors such as intelligence or other supposed indications of superiority aren't just full of holes, but that they're not even relevant. Why should being smarter, more capable, or more powerful be a reason to hurt those who are not? The only relevant questions in this discussion are A, whether we think unnecessary pain and suffering is bad, yes, I hope, and B, whether or not animals can experience pain and suffering, yes, obviously. I mean, I don't know about you, but personally, when I hear a creature screaming in pain, I don't require it to submit a formal letter of complaint before I stop hurting it. Reduction is better than nothing, yes. If you must buy meat, then local is better than imported, yes. But if you have the means, don't stop there, because animal abuse is a bad thing that we shouldn't be doing at all. I mean, can you imagine if we raised humans like this with regards to violence towards each other? No, Tommy, don't punch that kid every day, just punch that kid twice a week. Well done, reduction. No, you wouldn't say that. You'd just be like, don't punch people. This is why I no longer have much respect for people who say, I don't care about animals, or even are just vegan for the environment. Because if you can't empathize with beings perfectly capable of pain and suffering, you should ask yourself, why the hell not? Because honestly, that's the only thing that should need to be said. I am tired of going on about the environment or the benefit to humanity. The meat industry is indefensibly cruel and in a way that outclasses virtually all other exploitative industries in terms of what it is producing. Unlike other abusive and damaging industries, the use of animals as products is inherently unethical. If you buy a t-shirt that was made in a sweatshop, you do not physically purchase an exploited child. It is in fact possible to make t-shirts without exploiting children. Whereas when you buy a dead animal, you are buying a dead animal. The harm done by the meat industry isn't an avoidable byproduct. It is the product. Yes, there is no ethical consumption under capitalism, and to vegans watching this, don't sit around consumed by guilt because some wanker undermined you by saying you're not perfect while they sit around doing sod all. You can't live a cruelty-free life. Not with the system the way it is now. We need change, and we need change on a structural level. Just not eating meat isn't going to cut it. But in this consumerist hellscape where virtually everything you own probably caused various degrees of harm to someone else, and all you can do is try and reduce that harm and campaign for changes within your limits, or just give up because it's practically impossible to keep your hands clean in a society where everything is dirty and confusing, one thing remains crystal clear. A dead body is a dead body. The only way to end this intrinsically abusive process is to end demand for the product. And that is a responsibility that does lie with you, consumer. Because capitalism will continue to push meat down our throats for as long as we accept it, even if it literally kills us. And isn't that messed up? that it has to be literally about to kill us before we'll consider not doing it. I mean, let's just say that veganism brought no benefit to humanity or to the environment. Let's say that the only difference between a society that eats meat and a society that doesn't is that those animals stop being bred, abused, and slaughtered, and that one form of violence, that one most fundamental form of exploitation is finally over. That should be worth doing, even if nothing else were to change. Though of course that wouldn't be the situation, because veganism doesn't exist in a vacuum. A non-violent society is fundamentally incompatible with the practice of killing animals. Veganism is not individualist. It's part of a global movement towards non-violence, to animals, to people, and to the planet. It is one of many communitarian practices resulting from the desire for a world where unnecessary pain and violence is neither normalized nor accepted. But tell people whatever you have to. Tell them it will be better for the environment, 'cause it will. Tell them it could help to end world hunger, 'cause it could. Tell them that this shit actually affects them and they need to take action now to save themselves. Because not doing something just because it's abusive, exploitative, and wrong never seems to be reason enough. You've been watching the 9 o'clock discourse. Thank you for joining us. Good night. Huge thanks to my monthly coffee supporters, Isaac DF, Jake, Kaylee, Khalil Fazal, and Zoto Zan. I am not earning enough to justify making these videos, so if you want to help me make more, please consider becoming a monthly supporter on Ko-fi. Even just £1 a month is a massive help. In keeping with the themes of this video, do only what you're capable of. If donating isn't an option, you can also help a ton by subscribing, liking this video, leaving a comment, and sharing. Thanks again for watching.